I have spent 5 years of my life in Ireland. Naturally, at some point I wanted to know how its politics work, and so I checked its constitution. And it did not disappoint. While in many ways Ireland is a typical Western democracy, the constitution and its history include some aspects that are pretty unique in the world, or even downright quirky. For example, for more than a decade it was unclear who the actual head of state of Ireland was. Ireland is furthermore the only country in the world where parts of its national parliament are exclusively elected by university graduates. It is also one of the countries with the highest number of referendums, and these are just a few of the many surprising features of the Irish constitution. So let's have a look at the political system of Ireland. How did Ireland get the constitution it has today? A little historical recap. The current constitution is not Ireland's first. Already in 1922, they adopted a new fundamental law and officially became known as the Irish Free State. This was a result of the Irish War of Independence between 1919 and 1921, which concluded with the so-called Anglo-Irish Treaty. In that treaty, it was declared that an Irish state should be established as a self-governing dominion within the community of nations known as the British Empire. As you can already see, that doesn't really sound like real independence. So fought the Irish Republican Army, and so the country split between anti-treaty and pro-treaty forces, causing the Irish Civil War between 1922 and 1923. The pro-treaty forces won, and the new Irish Free State, together with its constitution, was consolidated. But even after the Civil War, the Anglo-Irish Treaty remained controversial. Not to forget, of course, that the treaty contained a provision that offered the 6 counties in Northern Ireland the option to opt out of the Irish Free State, which they immediately did. The new Irish state and its constitution were thus heavily compromised. After all, it was a document that could not be regarded as fully self-determined by the Irish, since the draft needed to be negotiated with British authorities and the British Parliament needed to approve it. Enemies of the Free State took an abstentionist line towards its institutions. Anti-treaty members of the famous Sinn Féin party boycotted the parliament and did not take their seats. In 1926, when Sinn Féin president Eamon De Valera failed to have this policy reversed, he resigned from Sinn Féin and led most of his followers into a new party, Fianna Fáil. Although formally a staunch anti-treaty advocate as well, De Valera's new goal was to republicanize the Irish Free State from within. He was able to form a government in 1932 as Fianna Fáil became the largest party. De Valera would become the leading political figure and influence Irish politics over the next decades. Before De Valera came to power, relations with the British had already changed. In 1931, the British Parliament passed the Statute of Westminster. It relinquished nearly all of its remaining authority to legislate for the Irish Free State or its other dominions. This had the effect of granting the Free State internationally recognized independence. Upon taking office, De Valera began removing the monarchical elements of the constitution, such as various references to the British Crown, most importantly the so-called Oath of Allegiance. This oath required fidelity to the British monarch and the Commonwealth and was absolutely despised by Irish Republicans. Nevertheless, the Fianna Fáil government still desired to replace the constitutional document they saw as having been imposed by the British government. De Valera wanted a truly Irish foundation for the country. He would become the driving force of its creation and can be considered the father of the new constitution of Ireland. The draft was put to a plebiscite in July 1937. When it was passed by 56% of the voters, the Irish Free State was renamed simply to Ireland, or Éireann in Irish language. By the way, we will all learn a bit of Irish today, and if you are Irish, let me know in the comments how good or bad my pronunciation was. This constitution from 1937, with some amendments, still governs Irish politics today. But what is written in it, and how does it organize the new Irish state? Let's start with the newly introduced office of the President of Ireland, which immediately caused some problems. The President is to be elected by popular vote for a 7-year term, and can be re-elected once. He formally appoints members of the executive, the judiciary, and constitutional officers of the state. He formally signs bills into law, can exercise the power of clemency, and is the official commander-in-chief. All the ingredients for a formal head of state, you would say. But in 1937, there was quite some confusion and disagreement about who actually was Ireland's leading representative. Was it the President of Ireland, or was it still the British monarch? To further complicate the story, just in the year before the constitution was enacted, British King George V died and was succeeded by his eldest son, who became Edward VIII. The new king's reign lasted only 11 months. He abdicated and was succeeded by George VI. This created a nice opportunity for De Valera and his government, since the parliaments of independent members of the British Commonwealth were required to ratify this change in monarch. De Valera used the crisis in the British succession to drastically change the monarch's influence on Ireland. Among these measures was the so-called External Relations Act, where the king's role was restricted to diplomatic and foreign affairs, but he would no longer perform formal duties with regards to domestic legislation or governance. We have seen that these formal ceremonial functions would go over to the Irish president within the new constitution, but the document did not provide clarity on the question of head of state. It did not mention the king anymore, but did not explicitly declare the president as the head of state either. Therefore, it was internationally unclear whether the Irish state had become a republic or remained a form of constitutional monarchy under the British king. De Valera later stated Ireland had become a republic and that the president is the head of state, while the British said, "You're still kind of part of the Commonwealth, aren't you?" While the Irish government had ceased to actively participate in the institutions of the British Commonwealth after 1932, there had never been a formal exit. This all led to awkward situations, because the best way to infuriate Irish delegations was by toasting the king instead of the Irish president. In 1948 then, it was decided to bring an end to this ambiguity. So the Republic of Ireland Act was passed, which finally repealed the External Relations Act. It provided that the name of the country is Ireland, while the description of the state was the Republic of Ireland. And it mandated that the external relations of the state would henceforth be exercised by the president. The United Kingdom responded to the Republic of Ireland Act with the Ireland Act in 1949. It formally asserted that the Irish state had ceased to be part of His Majesty's dominions and accordingly was no longer within the Commonwealth. At the same time, however, it made it unmistakably clear that Northern Ireland would continue to be part of the United Kingdom. By the way, the British also liked that they could now call it the Republic of Ireland instead of just Ireland, since the latter one implies a claim over the whole island of Ireland. Before that, the British preferred to use the original Irish name Éireann in international contexts and in treaties. A dispute over the name would continue later. The UK protested the Irish membership within the United Nations and the European Economic Community under the name Ireland, but referring to it as the Republic of Ireland remained an exclusive British convention, and nowadays surprisingly that of some Wikipedia sites. Only after the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 did the new practice of referring to the Irish state by the name of Ireland in official documents become more common in Britain. We have now the head of state with mainly representative functions established, but as a republic, the true heart of the country is of course the Irish Parliament, called Oireachtas. The Parliament is the only institution that has the power to make laws. It is separated between two chambers, the Dáil Éireann, the lower house, and the Seanad Éireann, the upper house. The Dáil is the driving force of Irish politics. The precise number of members is determined by census. Currently there are 174. The members of the Dáil are called Teachta Dála, or short TDs. How do they get elected? Ireland uses a rather rare voting system that, on the national parliamentary level, is used in only two other countries in the world, Australia and Malta. It is a system of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. What does that mean? First, Ireland elects 3 to 5 parliament members per electoral district. To be elected, a candidate needs to meet a certain calculated quota. If a candidate reaches that threshold, they are elected. The voting process is then conducted as follows. You don't just vote for one single person, but you can rank the candidates in accordance with your preference. 1 for your favorite, 2 for your second favorite, 3 for your third, and so on and so on. The goal is that no vote should be wasted, and each vote is worth about the same as another. Imagine, for example, that your favorite candidate wins easily by gaining the necessary quota to be elected, and therefore actually does not need your extra vote. Then the surplus is transferred to help elect someone else you like, your number 2 or 3, etc. Another scenario is that your first preference has very few votes and is eliminated since he would not get the necessary quota to be elected. Your vote is then transferred to your next preference instead of simply being thrown away. This process of electing winners, transferring surpluses, and eliminating losers continues until all the seats in the electoral district are filled. The single transferable vote is widely considered to be a highly fair voting system that offers a high degree of proportionality and is maximizing voter choice. And who is allowed to vote? Eligible to elect these TDs of the Dáil are not only Irish citizens from the age of 18, but also British citizens residing in Ireland. This extension was made via a constitutional amendment passed in 1984, done simply to reciprocate the voting rights that the British already allowed Irish citizens in their own parliamentary elections. This remains a truly unique arrangement, as there is no current pair of fully sovereign states that mutually allow each other's citizens to vote in national elections. While there are examples of allowing participation in local elections, like the Scandinavian countries, or unilateral arrangements, such as the UK allowing certain Commonwealth citizens to vote, this mutual deal between Ireland and the UK stands alone in the world. The Dáil's primary role is to legislate, but its most critical function is to form and sustain a government. This happens through a vote of confidence. The Dáil nominates a Prime Minister, who in Ireland is called the Taoiseach, who is then formally appointed by the President. Since the early 1980s, no single party has been able to secure an outright majority in the Dáil, meaning coalition governments have been the norm to secure a majority for a Taoiseach. While the Dáil is a very regular lower house, the second parliamentary chamber is, frankly, pretty weird. The Seanad Éireann, or just Senate, acts as a revising chamber. While both chambers can initiate legislation, certain bills, like money bills or bills to amend the constitution, must be exclusively proposed by the Dáil. The Senate is the decidedly weaker chamber, as it can only delay a bill from becoming law, but not stop it entirely. If the Senate votes not to pass a bill, the bill will lapse after 180 days. The Dáil has also the power within those 180 days to pass a resolution declaring that the bill is deemed to have been passed by both houses. Interesting it gets, however, when we look at the composition of the Senate. It has 60 members, 11 of them are appointed by the Taoiseach. So far so good, but another 6 seats are reserved for election by graduates of specific Irish universities. Until recently, this meant 3 seats for the University of Dublin and 3 seats for the National University of Ireland. This concept of university constituencies is already highly unusual on a national level. It gets even more unique with the remaining 43 members, who are elected through special vocational panels. Each panel corresponds to a group of professions or vocations, and candidates are required to have knowledge and practical experience in their field. These 5 panels are administrative, agricultural, cultural and educational, industrial and commercial, and labour. Candidates are nominated either by sitting members of parliament or by a registered nominating body. For example, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions can nominate for the Labour panel, and the Royal Irish Academy for the Culture and Educational panel. Crucially, the electorate is tiny. Only the members of the outgoing Senate, the members of the Dáil, and elected local government authorities have a voting right. This means barely more than 1,000 people decide the composition of the Senate. The core idea behind the structure is clear. The Constitution seeks to give a voice to academics and experts from various professional backgrounds within the parliamentary system. It was a system born during a time in the 1930s when corporatism, the representation of social and economic interest groups, was a very fashionable political concept. Needless to say, this institution has been heavily criticized on a number of grounds, mainly for being elitist and undemocratic. Critics also point out that because the Constitution gives the Senate so little responsibilities, it is essentially a powerless rubber stamp that does nothing but cost their taxpayer money. In 2013, the debate came to a head, with a referendum on abolishing the chamber entirely, but the motion was narrowly rejected by 51.7% of the votes. So the unusual Senate is here to stay. At least a significant reform was finally passed in 2024 to address the privileged position of the National University and the Dublin University. It was no longer justifiable why only those 2 institutions should have such a special representation. Now a 6-seat higher education constituency has been introduced, in which all degree holders from any institution of higher education will be entitled to vote. The in this way elected members of parliament in both chambers serve for a 5-year term. While the constitution permits a term up to 7 years, it allows the term to be shortened by law. The Dáil remains the more significant chamber for everyday politics. Typically, the government proposes bills with the support of its parliamentary majority. The Taoiseach nominates their deputy, the Taoiseach, as well as his ministers, which can be no fewer than 7 and no more than 15. Because the government must retain the Dáil's confidence to stay in office, the lower house effectively controls the executive. It brings governments into existence, and it can bring them down. If the Taoiseach loses the support of the majority, the constitution demands that he must resign, unless the Taoiseach advises the president to dissolve the parliament for new elections, giving the government a chance to secure majority support again. Notably, the decision on whether to dissolve the parliament or not is the only reserved power the president has that can be exercised by him in absolute discretion. There is a certain fusion between the executive and the legislative power. Some constitutions demand the members of the government cannot be at the same time members of the legislative. Other constitutions do not care, and they can be members or not. Ireland requires the opposite. The members of the government must be elected members of one of the 2 parliamentary chambers. Specifically, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, and the Finance Minister must all be members of the Dáil Éireann. The remaining members of the government must belong to either chamber, though only a maximum of 2 can be part of the Senate. On the one hand, this rule goes against the classical ideal of a separation of powers, but on the other hand, it ensures a strong link of accountability between the executive and the elected representatives. In contrast, the members of the third branch, the judiciary, are strictly separated. They are not allowed to be part of either the executive or the legislative, to ensure the judges' independence. The Constitution recognizes three superior courts: the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court. The High Court serves as the highest court for civil and criminal cases. The Court of Appeal is a relatively new body, added via a constitutional amendment in 2013. Its creation was intended to free up the Supreme Court, allowing it to restrict its focus to cases of constitutional importance. The Supreme Court of Ireland is the highest judicial authority and is tasked with ensuring compliance with the Constitution. Although all three superior courts have the power to review and interpret the Constitution, only the decisions of the Supreme Court are final and conclusive. The Supreme Court has 9 ordinary members and is led by a Chief of Justice. The High Court has 42 ordinary judges and the Court of Appeal has 18, with both having their own respective presidents. All these courts are interconnected, as each of the presidents and the Chief of Justice are also members of the other superior courts. While the courts check the executive by reviewing government actions for their constitutionality, all judges are appointed by the president on nomination by the government. In the past, the government received recommendations from the Judicial Appointments Advisory Board. Critics, however, argued that judicial appointments were frequently politically motivated, as the government was not obligated to follow the recommendations of the Advisory Board, since this is in fact not part of the Constitution. Therefore, there was potential to fill courts with government sympathizers. But beginning of 2025, a new law on judicial appointments was introduced and the previous board was replaced by the Judicial Appointments Commission. It was determined by law that the government can only consider nominations by that commission, thereby ensuring appointments are based on merit and taking away some power from the executive. The judges then hold office for life, with a mandatory retirement age set to 70 years. The superior courts check the legislative branch by reviewing laws for their constitutionality. Parliament, on the other hand, has the power to remove judges for misbehavior or incapacity. It is also the job of the Supreme Court to declare if the president has become incapacitated. If the president has any doubts about the bill passed by Parliament, he can refer it directly to the Supreme Court for constitutional review, before it becomes law and thereby postpone his signature. Many other constitutions do not have such a dedicated mechanism to check for the constitutionality of a bill before it becomes law. Usually the review comes afterwards, but such decisions the president cannot make in sole discretion. He is constitutionally required to discuss the matter with the Council of State, which is an institution established to advise the president. The council consists of the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the president of all courts, the chairman of both parliamentary chambers, as well as the Attorney General. Also, all former holders of these offices can be part of the council, as well as up to 7 members that the president nominates himself. Besides the institutional interplay, there is also a lot of direct democracy built into the system. Ireland has held since 1937 more than 40 referenda, a figure leaving it behind only Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Italy in Europe. 2 kinds of referenda are possible according to the Constitution: ordinary and constitutional referenda. An ordinary referendum can be held if a proposed bill is petitioned by a majority of the members of the Senate and no less than 1/3 of the members of the Dáil to the President. The President, upon consulting with the Council of State, can approve or deny the request for a referendum. Interestingly, not a single ordinary referendum on legislation has ever taken place. All of Ireland's plebiscites were so far constitutional referenda. While many countries allow changes to the constitution to take place by a parliamentary supermajority, in Ireland politicians cannot touch a single word of the constitution on their own. Any proposal to amend the constitution, whether a tiny change or a major reform, needs approval by the people. This mechanism reinforces the principle that the people are the final authority in Ireland. Therefore, referenda are not a rare event, but a core part of Irish political life. It was a referendum that allowed Ireland to join the European Union, that removed the special position of the Catholic Church, legalized divorce, same-sex marriage and abortion, and ratified the Good Friday Agreement. This subsequently changed the critical Articles 2 and 3 of the Irish Constitution from the previous claim of the whole island of Ireland to an aspiration towards creating a united Ireland by peaceful means. The Irish Constitution is not a frozen relic. It has been amended over 32 times since its existence in 1937. More than the 27 times of the much older US Constitution. This strong focus on referendums and constitutional change makes it possible for the constitution to adapt to new modern problems and keeps it in the hands of the people, who function as a corrective force besides the established legislative, executive and judicial powers. But what do you think? Does Ireland do well holding that many referenda? Do you think its unconventional Senate is based on outdated elitist principles? And how do you view its election system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you soon.